The retro handheld space is kind of an interesting market because you've got so many different companies competing and vying for your attention and also for your money. So many of these products get released that not only is it overwhelming you with all of these options, but on top of that, I feel like we don't even talk about a single device for too long before we quickly move on to the next device. However, there is one retro handheld that's still a hot item right now, and it's discussed as if it was released yesterday, and that is of course the Retroid Pocket 5. This thing dropped a couple of months ago, and a lot of people have been hailing this thing as the new retro handheld king, or at least one of the best options you can get. So today I really wanted to dig deep on this device and see whether or not it lives up to the hype. So obviously the Retroid Pocket 5 is the latest drop from Retroid, and I finally got my hands on it after a really long wait. I ordered this thing on November 27th and it didn't arrive until like December 20th, so I was waiting almost a month to get my hands on this thing. This device dropped a little bit after the Retroid Pocket Mini released, and that was essentially the same device but in a smaller form factor, running a little bit older version of Android, but for the most part you're getting a similar experience but a much different form factor. I personally wasn't too interested in the mini device, so I was waiting for what feels like the flagship of Retroid, which is the Pocket 5. The device comes in at about $219, but then if you factor in shipping and taxes, and obviously depending on where you're located, you're going to be looking at about $250 plus for this device. I'll go ahead and throw up all the specs on the screen if you haven't seen them already, but some of the key things that you want to pay attention to are the 5.5-inch AMOLED 1080p display, alongside it running Android 13, which is another really big and important factor to me when it came to making this decision. Now, I did own the previous model, the Retroid Pocket 4 Pro, but to be honest with you, I wasn't super impressed with that model. That one did get a lot of the same love and attention that the Retroid Pocket 5 is getting right now, but I just didn't think that it lived up to the price point that I was getting. It was still around $200 to $210, and it didn't feel as premium of a device to justify that payment, in my opinion. So I did end up selling that device. So I'm somebody coming in here with a perspective on the Retroid Pocket 5 as somebody who did not enjoy the RP4 Pro, which so many others did. There's already a lot of reviews of this device on YouTube, but I'm hoping I can add a unique perspective here as somebody who did end up selling the previous model, the RP4 Pro, and as somebody who didn't receive this device as, a sponsorship or for free. This device was not sent to me. I had to spend my own money on this thing, which I don't have a lot of to begin with. So hopefully I can give a unique review on this thing. And on top of that, we've got a lot of other information and complaints on the internet about this device that we can dive into, since people have owned this thing for a couple of weeks now. Let's go ahead and jump into the basics and start with the build quality and design. So Retroid obviously decided to go with a much more sleeker look here for the Retroid Pocket 5 compared to the previous RP4 Pro. There's a lot of color options for the RP5, but I caved into my nostalgic feelings and ended up going with the GameCube colorway. You can see it's designed to look like a GameCube controller, and that absolutely pulled at my heartstrings as somebody whose favorite console is the GameCube. I didn't think I was going to regret my decision at all, because I thought this was by far the best colorway and the best color option, until I saw this Reddit post where somebody actually bought the extra buttons on the side that Retroid sells with the device, and then he swapped out the buttons for the black model to make that look like a black GameCube controller. To me, this is by far the best Retroid Pocket color that I've ever seen, because not only do you get that nostalgic looking GameCube controller, but then you also get the black design that makes the bezels for older consoles blend into the screen and blend into the device more. So you're getting the best of both worlds. In terms of the design, we've got rounded edges compared to the RP4 Pro and a much bigger screen here. This is a 5.5-inch OLED screen, and it looks unreal. The back of the device now also has ergonomic grips and bumps with a very unique and kind of grittier plastic for your hands to rest on. And this is absolutely a welcome change from the RP4 Pro. It's much more comfortable to hold in your hands because of those grips. The plastic used on this thing also feels great, and it's got an all glass front, which means is that this device just feels incredibly premium. So for the price that you pay, it feels like it could be worth, you know, $200, $250. With the sleek curved edges and then the high quality plastic alongside the ergonomic grips that they ended up adding to this thing, it all kind of comes in together to form this really high quality and sleek feeling package that, you know, for the form factor and the size, it doesn't jeopardize too much. Moving on, we can look at the buttons now, and we've got the typical Retroid D-pad that they've used on so many other devices previously, and this thing is fantastic. I think this is actually my favorite D-pad on any retro handheld or gaming handheld that I've used. I'm not super picky about my D-pads. The main thing that I look for when it comes to a great D-pad is that it's precise, and then on top of that, it's not fatiguing. And this one right here is just clicky enough to feel very satisfying to use, but it doesn't fatigue you at all whenever you are playing games for an extended period of time. And overall, I found that the D-pad is one of the best, if not the best D-pad, like I said, that I've used. On the bottom left and on the bottom right, you've got Hall effect joysticks, which are quite small, but to be honest, with the range of motion that you get and the form factor of the device, it doesn't feel like it's cramped too much, and they do feel incredibly solid to use. This is where one of the first complaints comes in though about this device, and it's with the placement of the sticks. A lot of people I've noticed in reviews or on Reddit have talked about how they don't enjoy the fact that these sticks are rubbing against their thumbs as they use the D-pad or the buttons on the upper right or upper left. People would have preferred if the sticks were a little bit more inwards towards the screen and therefore wouldn't rub up against as much on your thumbs whenever you're holding the device. For me personally, I haven't found this to be an issue at all. I can understand somebody with maybe gigantic thumbs or bigger hands. I don't have huge hands. I've got like medium-sized hands. So for me, this has not been an issue whatsoever. My thumbs do sometimes rub up against the joysticks, but it doesn't bother me at all, and I don't find it to be distracting whenever I'm playing any games or doing anything on the device. Moving on to the face buttons, these things are pretty solid. They're not pushed too far outside of the shell, so it doesn't have too much of a travel whenever you do press them down, and overall I did think that the buttons were pretty solid and fun to press. Now, another complaint that a lot of people were talking about when it comes to the build quality of this device were also the buttons and the noise that they produce whenever you are playing games. Now, this sounds super nitpicky, but I actually did find this to be somewhat true, and probably the first, I guess, minor complaint I have about this device, and it's just the noise that the buttons make whenever you're playing the games or pressing down on them. It's definitely a little bit to the point where I would get slightly uncomfortable if somebody's right next to me. That's how loud the buttons get. Last thing to note here about the build quality, since this is an all glass front, is that the screen protector that you buy with Retroid will also cover all of the glass on the front and not just the screen. Now, to be honest with you, I actually had a pretty horrible time with this screen protector. I'm normally pretty cautious and pretty careful, and I'd like to think when I was applying this, I was very careful, but I still notice a lot of issues when it comes to the actual screen protector itself. The biggest one is just that some of the bubbles have not faded away and it doesn't seem to be sticking properly to my device. Unfortunately, I did end up getting a lot of specks of dust on the screen, and it has been driving me crazy to the point where I'm probably gonna have to reorder a different screen protector. So overall, the build quality is fantastic. I love the way that this device feels way more than the RP4 Pro, and that device didn't feel bad by any means, but this is absolutely a step up from the previous model and something that I quickly took note of as soon as I got it in my hands. All right, next up, we've got the software experience and what it's actually like to own this device and play your games and set everything up. So this is running Android, which means you're gonna have to take a lot of time to set things up, particularly the emulators and collecting and scraping all of your ROMs and all of that stuff. If you're looking for a device that you can just buy and then as soon as you get it out the box, you can start playing games, this is absolutely not the device for you. I followed Retro Game Core's setup guides for his Retroid Pockets, and that was a pretty easy and seamless tutorial to help you get all your emulators up and running. But just note, it will take some time, at least like a couple of hours, to really get everything precisely down the way that you want to. For some people, that's a very big issue and it can turn them off from a device like this. But for me, in my personal experience, setting up the device and getting all my emulators set up and collecting the ROMs and, scraping the ROMs, getting the box arts, all of that stuff is very fun. And I love tinkering on the device and personalizing it to the way that I would want it to be set up. I haven't found the perfect front end that I absolutely love, so I've been kind of rotating between some different themes through ESDE, and now I'm trying to set up Beacon. It does come with a Retroid launcher, which is like the stock, I guess, launcher that Retroid themselves designs, but I would not use that. And then once you get everything set up, you're finally ready to go and play some games. And now we can talk about the emulation performance. So this is a higher end device, I would say. It's kind of a little bit more of the mid-tier devices here with the retro handhelds in the $200 and $250 price point. We've seen other devices come in at like $400 for a emulation machine, which is just insane to me personally. So I think the $200 to $250 price point is pretty spot on for what you're able to emulate. And that includes most of PS2, GameCube, Wii at around a 3x or 2x native resolution. So older games are going to look fantastic on this because you're going to get that bump in resolution quality and you're not going to drop any frames or performance because of it. Recently, I've been playing the Animal Crossing GameCube version, but I've actually added HD texture packs, and on top of that, I've enabled the widescreen hacks, which you can do with a lot of different GameCube games, and it'll actually fit and stretch to the 16:9 aspect ratio. And then that, coupled along with HD texture packs, looks like you're playing a remastered version of that GameCube game. It's an incredible experience. So all of those games look amazing, as well as, GBA, your typical SNES games. You can even go into older systems. You've got PS1 games. The list goes on for things that you can emulate on this device and have it look amazing. But the performance does cap out a little bit whenever you start getting into, Wii U and Switch games. For some people, that's a very big deal breaker. They don't enjoy the fact that this thing can't emulate Switch games or Wii U games flawlessly, at a perfect 60 frames without dropping in any performance or any tinkering. But to me, it's not a deal breaker at all. I don't really see the value in wanting to play, recent or super modern Switch games or even more modern consoles on this device. I specifically bought this thing to play GameCube, PS2, Wii, and below. So I don't have any expectations to play higher end systems, and I just view those as a bonus. But there's still so many great titles that you can play on this device. Obviously, if you own the game, I'm not encouraging any piracy here. This is all through legal matters, of course. If you do want to see what this device is capable of when it comes to Switch games, Ryan Retro put together a fantastic spreadsheet with the help of his community, where they essentially tested a bunch of different games and ranked whether or not it was actually playable, or if it was perfect, or if it had poor performance. And they also gave a category where they adjusted and gave you the settings for each emulator. So if you're about to make the purchase, but you want to see quickly what it might be capable of, this is a great resource. And then on top of that, you can throw Android games into the mix, which is the cherry on top of all of these games. Android games have been getting better and better, and these also look quite phenomenal on this OLED panel. And then in addition to the Android games, you've got access to the Google Play Store, which means there's actually alternative uses for the Retroid Pocket 5 that I don't think anybody else has really covered. I did get this idea from James Scholes, but you can get Anki on this device because you have access to the Google Play Store. And then now, out of nowhere, your Retroid Pocket 5 or Android handheld essentially becomes a video game device for learning a language. So not only do I have an emulation handheld right here, but I've also got a dedicated Spanish learning machine for my brain as well. But all of these games, no matter what system it's from, are going to look flawless, and that is because of the number one talked about thing with this device, and that is the OLED panel. Retroid did such a good job picking the screen for this device. Everything pops out at you whenever you're playing these games. I'll show you a comparison with the Steam Deck OLED and the Switch OLED. This thing, is up to par, if not even better than some of those options, and that's incredible coming out of a $200 to $250 handheld. So I've been gushing about this device for so long. I think you can already tell that I'm a really big fan of the Retroid Pocket 5, but I do want to consider some of the deal breakers that other people have mentioned in other reviews, or just as this device has been out for a little bit, you can see the complaints that other people have about it. I'd say the biggest deal breaker comes down to the ergonomics, and that's kind of what we discussed earlier with the stick placements, but I've also seen plenty of people complaining about how the back bumps and the back ergonomics are not enough to make this a comfortable handheld. Some people have described hands cramping after a couple hours of gaming, and to be honest with you, I can see that happening. If you do play this device and intend on playing it for 2, 3, maybe even 4 hours on this device, I absolutely do think your hands would get a little bit cramped because it is in that smaller form factor. But for me, I'm not really gaming on this thing for longer than maybe an hour to an hour and a half. I'm just doing short bursts on this thing, and for all of those sessions, I have not experienced any uncomfortable, cramping or any issues. But if you do have really big hands, that's something that I would really recommend you consider, is the form factor of this device and whether or not it fits for you. Another deal breaker that I do see all over the place is just the fact that the analog stick on the left side is placed in the bottom left instead of the top left. And to be honest with you, I do think that swapping the D-pad with the joystick would have made this device a little bit more comfortable, and less people would have probably complained about the ergonomics issue that we just discussed. I think most of us are going to be playing games that require you to use the joystick, so it just would have made a little bit more sense for it to be in that spot in particular. For the most part, I do not think it is a deal breaker for me, but that's something that you should consider. And then finally, the third and last deal breaker I would say that is most popular or most common with this device is just the emulation performance when you get to Switch and higher end devices. Several people just want something that has more power and can emulate everything that they throw at it, but for me, I don't necessarily see that argument with any retro handheld, because I think when you start to get into the more modern consoles, you're gonna not get as great as emulation, because those platforms and sometimes those apps are not even being developed anymore. I would just prefer you get a Switch or buy a newer console, in my opinion. Obviously, it's great to have a device that can play all of that, but with the tinkering that you would have to do, even if your device can play those games perfectly, you're still gonna have to mess with so many settings. Maybe you won't even have an option to play certain games, even if you have the power to play them. So for me, that's not a deal breaker, but if you want something that can play everything and never have any hiccups, then this might not be the best device. Okay, so that concludes most of what I had to say about this device. As you can tell, I'm a pretty big fan of this specific Retroid Pocket 5. I think they did a fantastic job upgrading things from the previous model, and right now this feels like a fantastic value for $220 plus the shipping and handling. Playing all the older systems, and then also just the fun of setting this thing up and having it all come together and messing with the settings and tweaking it all has been a very fun experience, and I do not regret my purchase whatsoever. And now I can comfortably say that unlike the RP4 Pro, I will not be selling the Retroid Pocket 5. But overall, I really do love this device. I think it's a great pickup for those of you who are interested in something like this. And that's about it. I just felt like yapping about this device for the entire video. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. And I hope you have a great day. And I'll see you hopefully in the next video. See ya.